Have you ever wished you could just control the weather? Schedule some rain for your garden or guarantee a sunny day for a big event. It's an idea that's always felt like pure science fiction. But what happens when that fantasy starts to get real?
And look, that quote right there, that's not from some sci-fi novel. It's from actual researchers who are exploring where today's technology might be headed, a future where the weather itself becomes a product, something you can literally buy and sell.
So to figure out what that future might look like, researchers at Colorado State University did something kind of cool. They actually used science fiction to game out the possibilities. They imagined a world with spring rain services for sale, or politicians manipulating weather to win elections. It turns out, telling stories can sometimes show you risks that boring old data just can't.
Okay, so that's the far-out sci-fi stuff. But let's bring it back to reality. Right now, the most common way we try to modify weather isn't about creating massive storms out of nowhere. It's much smaller scale. It's really about giving clouds that are already there a little nudge, and we've been doing it for almost 80 years. So what exactly is cloud seeding? Well, the simple version is this. It's a technique to try and convince a cloud to drop more rain or snow than it was gonna anyway. You do that by spraying tiny particles into the air that give all that water vapor something to latch onto, basically kickstarting the whole process.
And this technology has a pretty wild history. It all started with a total accident at General Electric back in 1946. But it was quickly picked up for other uses. We had the US military trying to weaken hurricanes with Project Storm Fury. Then there was the super controversial Operation Popeye in Vietnam, where the goal was literally to make mud, not war. And more recently, you had China using it to try and keep the skies clear for the 2008 Olympics.
Okay, so how does this actually work in practice? Well, first you need the right kind of cloud, one that's full of water droplets that are colder than freezing but haven't turned to ice yet. Then you introduce something like silver iodide. Its crystal structure looks so much like ice that it basically tricks those water droplets into freezing around it. These little ice crystals then get bigger and bigger until eventually they're heavy enough to fall as snow or rain. Which, of course, brings us to the million-dollar question, the one scientists have been arguing about for decades. Does any of this stuff actually work? And the answer is, well, it's really complicated.
So on one side, you've got the people who say yes, absolutely. The American Meteorological Society, for instance, said that in very specific situations, especially with clouds forming over mountains, you can boost seasonal precipitation by about 10%. This is the argument that ski resorts and water districts in the western U.S. are banking on.
But on the other side, you've got a whole lot of skepticism. A big study from Tel Aviv University, for example, found that it has little, if any, real impact. In fact, in 2021, Israel completely shut down its own national cloud seeding program because they decided it just wasn't effective enough to justify the cost.
So what's the bottom line? Well, even in the absolute best-case scenario, the results are pretty modest. Climate scientist Daniel Swain from UCLA says you're maybe squeezing an extra 5 to 10% of precipitation out of some very specific clouds in very specific places. It's about augmenting what's there, not creating something new.
And that right there is the fundamental limit of this technology. You can't just make it rain from a clear blue sky. Cloud seeding is not a magic wand to end a drought. You've got to have the right kind of clouds to begin with, clouds that are already on the verge of producing rain or snow.
And this is where the whole conversation takes a huge, dramatic turn. Okay, so trying to nudge a single cloud is hard, and the payoff is small. So what if we stopped thinking so small? What if we started thinking bigger, like planet-sized bigger?
And that leap in thinking takes us to a much larger and way more controversial idea: geoengineering. We're not talking about making it snow at a ski resort anymore. We're talking about trying to alter the Earth's entire climate system to fight global warming.
Now, it is super important that we get the difference here. Weather modification, like cloud seeding, is local. It's temporary. The goal is just to get a little more rain or snow. Climate engineering, that's global. It's long-term. We're talking decades or even centuries. And the goal is to fundamentally change the planet's thermostat. The type of geoengineering that gets the most attention is called solar radiation modification, or SRM. The basic idea is to copy what huge volcanoes do. You know how after a major eruption the planet cools down a bit? That's because of all the reflective particles thrown into the atmosphere. SRM is basically the idea of doing that on purpose, spraying a fine mist of reflective aerosols high up in the stratosphere to bounce a little bit of sunlight back into space.
And that leads us to the absolutely terrifying question at the heart of all this.
If we actually build a global thermostat, who gets to control it? Who decides what the right temperature is for everyone on Earth?
This quote from The Guardian really puts that risk into perspective, doesn't it? The power to alter the entire planet's climate could easily become the ultimate geopolitical weapon. For example, the Trump administration focused on a strategy of American energy dominance. You can see how controlling the climate could be viewed as the ultimate version of that.
And the dangers here are just staggering. For starters, SRM is like a planetary painkiller, not a cure. It does absolutely nothing about the carbon dioxide that's causing the problem in the first place. It could mess with global rainfall patterns, maybe causing droughts and famines in one part of the world to help another. And then there's something called termination shock. If we ever started doing this, and then, for some reason, had to suddenly stop, the planet would heat up so fast it would be catastrophic.
So, because of these huge risks, it's no surprise there's major global pushback. Many African nations are leading the charge for a global non-use agreement, basically saying they refuse to be a testing ground for this dangerous tech. And in 2023, Mexico straight up banned any solar geoengineering experiments on its soil.
So after all of this, from trying to get a little more snow for a ski resort, all the way to literally dimming the sun, it all brings us back down to Earth, with a pretty sobering reality check.
Just listen to that quote from Daniel Swain again. He points out that the amount of energy in a single hurricane is bigger than all our nuclear weapons combined. The idea that we can actually steer these massive forces of nature, he says that's not just something we can't do now, he thinks it's something we'll probably never be able to do.
Which leaves us with one last nagging question. People have seriously proposed trying to stop a hurricane by detonating a nuclear bomb inside it. Scientists agree that would never work. All you'd get is a radioactive hurricane. So as we think about these huge technological fixes, we really have to ask ourselves, are we actually trying to solve a problem, or are we just running the risk of creating a much, much bigger one?